that there's a countdown on this, so now we know we're live for sure.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that.
Cool. Yeah. I love the changes that we're making, because oftentimes, as anybody watched the first videos of mine, I didn't know if we were live. I didn't know.
Could be talking to yourself.
Pretty much. But as long as you're here, that's all that matters, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to have fun while doing it.
100%. That's the whole point of this, right? So, okay, so I'm going to introduce you, and I don't really have that much of your background, because I know we connected here and we connected on LinkedIn, but you're a certified information systems security professional, which is, it's a mouthful.
Yes, it is. CISSP is it's usually known as CISSP. It's a certification, like any other security type of certification. I've had it for, I bet you it's probably about 10 years now that I've had the CISSP. If you want to get into the security game, that's one of the certifications that a lot of HR managers look for, because it gives you a really broad overview of security as a whole in many different types of domains.
Awesome. So Goody Cabral, hopefully I pronounced it right, Goody Cabral, has commented that we're live. So thankfully someone's acknowledged that we're live. Yeah. So I would assume for your clients, it's probably good for you to have that certification, and you're not just some random guy putting a shingle out to say, yeah, I can help you with your security.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of different types of certifications out there, not just the CISSP. There's other ones that really focus on penetration testing, hacking, using the tools. Right. So it really depends on what your focus is. Right. But from a sheer management perspective and HR perspective, the CISSP seems to carry a lot of weight.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Mm-hmm. So we've talked before a little bit about how security is a thing that taxes is something that most people don't really focus upon until it's too late. And I know,
absolutely. Right? And by then, like you said, it's too late, So right. It's just one of those things. It's kind of crazy, I have no idea why security is always kind of in the background. And well, I guess I kind of do know why, right? But we'll get into that later. So,
go ahead. I'm curious about your journey and everything like that. But yeah.
Okay. Well, in terms of security, I started off as like any other typical IT guy, right? So I got trained in IT, got trained in system administration, did some training in terms of network administration, and I had a typical 9-to-5 IT type of job where I worked in the finance sector for a credit union for many, many years. And, managed all of their desktops and servers and this and that. And somewhere along the way, I kind of transitioned into this security thing. In fact, I attended a training course that was put together by a company that I eventually ended up working for here in the local area many, many years after that. So it's kind of funny how things worked out in the end. But the training course that they offered was like a 4-day training course that kind of gave you a really nice intro into hacking and things like that, right? So I took that because at the time I was getting a promotion from, like a level 2 IT guy to like a supervisory position and whatnot, right? So the manager basically said, hey, why don't you take this training? I think it'll be good for you, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up taking it, and it completely blew me away. It just opened my eyes to the whole security game. And then I remember, sitting in that class thinking to myself, boy, I would love to work in security. That would be just the awesomest thing ever, right? Mm-hmm. And then here I am, 10 years later. I've been in the security game for about 11 years now in total. I started around 2009, towards the end of 2009, early 2010. And it's been an amazing ride, So like I said, I worked for a local company here that really focuses on penetration testing and security and things like that. And because of that job, I had the privilege of basically traveling all over Canada, all over the US, right? Because they had operations in both countries. So that gave me the chance to see many types of different networks. I've worked with police forces, I've worked with local governments, hospitals, in the manufacturing area, utilities as well. So, I've seen a lot of different types of networks, right? So over the years, I got to meet a lot of amazing people. I got to hack into a lot of really amazing types of networks. I mean, the coolest network that I ever got to play with was for a utility where I was basically testing one of the rings around a nuclear generation facility, right? Now, it wasn't one of the inner rings, it was more on the outer layers. But still, I mean, how often do you get to go to a nuclear generation place and, test their computer network, right? So it was a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed the ride. It's been absolutely amazing.
That's really cool. I originally thought it might be a bit of a thankless job, because when you're sort of behind the scenes, I bet you when you're fixing things, when what hits the fan,
Yeah.
there's a lot of thanks come when you're helping people out of a jam. Once the problem does happen, people are probably pretty grateful.
Yeah, they are. And you know what? You're absolutely correct. 100%. I mean, a lot of times now you have to remember one thing. When a penetration tester comes in and does the work and actually tests your networks, they typically do not do the mitigation, right? So if my job is really to come in, test the network, basically find all the issues that attackers would look at, and then provide you with a report, all right? And then it's your job to read through the report and then take whatever it is that I found, and then get someone else to actually fix it, right? Whether it's your IT guy, whether it's some other company that you choose, right? Now, that's not to say that once in a while, clients would kind of come back and go, "Hey, I have a question. You found this on page so and so, and can you give me a little bit more information?" So, yeah, for sure, we would follow things up, right? But you're absolutely correct. It is a thankless thing, and sometimes we don't get the credit where it's due, and that's okay. I mean, that's also true for IT in general. I mean, you never really think about like a large office, or if you work in a large office environment, right, and you've got an IT department that does things for you, right? Do you ever talk to them when you see them? Do you ever praise when things are working, right? Probably typically not. I mean, typically IT guys will only hear things when there's a problem, right? And people kind of go, "Oh, this isn't working, or that isn't working," right? So, but you know what? After doing this for so many years, you just kind of get used to it, and it's like, yeah, whatever. I'm just happy to have a job and happy to be doing things that I really love, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So these penetration tests that you're doing, is that where it's sort of this ransomware sort of stuff comes in? Is that
I
sort of
mean,
your
it
wheelhouse as far as
it
preventing?
can. Yeah, I mean, the whole ransomware thing. Ransomware is a symptom, of poor security, right? It's not necessarily the thing. I mean, there's many other ways to get into a network, and there's many other things that an attacker can do on a network once they're actually connected to the network and doing something, right? So ransomware by far is one of the biggest things that's always in the news, and that's because it's very expensive, right? Ransomware is super expensive, and it has become very expensive over the last, I don't know, 5 to 7 years, right? When ransomware first started being a thing, it was fairly normal for ransom requests to be in the hundreds of dollars, right? Now we're seeing tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even into the millions, right?
Yeah, which is terrifying. And I know that some of my neighbor, I think I told you, my neighbor's office had been hacked. And so the ransom, there was the ransom out there, and it took a few days for them to get it fixed. So the question I think I had asked, I wrote a bunch of questions ahead of time, was like, let's say a small business, because that's sort of your wheelhouse, is small to probably medium-sized businesses and so forth. Should someone pay a ransom if they get the sort of,
if they get hacked?
Yeah.
Well, the short answer is no, right? Because I mean, ransomware as a business model is a fantastic business model, right? I mean, if you have a shady side to you and you've got a little bit of skills with computers and coding and things like that, you can make a lot of money, right? Doing ransomware and things like that. And the reason why ransomware works is because of people paying for ransom, right? If everyone like tomorrow just kind of decided, okay, we're not going to pay ransom anymore, right? Globally, then ransomware would basically go away, right? Because there would be no business model anymore. But because, it's a thing, things like the Colonial Pipeline, right? Have you heard about that? That was like a month ago, right? Where that pipeline on the eastern seaboard in the US, right? They ended up paying $4.4 million, right? And then another one that was, I don't know, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, right around the same time, was a meat processing plant, JBS. They're like the largest meat processing plant in the world, right? And their U.S. operations got hit, and they ended up paying $11 million, right? Yeah. And actually, this past weekend was really huge in terms of ransomware because a software company called Kaseya, got hit with ransomware. Now, Kaseya is a piece of software that IT companies use to manage their clients' computers, right? And from what we know from the attack, it basically started roughly around the beginning of the long weekend. If you're thinking that, well, why would they pick a long weekend? Well, that's exactly why they picked the long weekend, right? Because everyone's trying to go home. Maybe IT companies aren't staffed at proper levels, right? Because it is a long weekend. So, it's the perfect time, the perfect opportunity to go ahead and attack. So from, what I've read online, between 1,000 and 1,500 different organizations were infected with ransomware through this Kaseya attack. And they were throwing numbers around like $70 million, to make available to anybody just this universal decrypting tool that would basically, let you get your data back, right?
Wow, that's terrifying. So, and some of the biggest organizations in the world have been hacked into, right? So it's certainly, if it's going to happen to some of the biggest, I see my friend Amy waving. She's got a hello in there. So Amy Liddell has jumped into the conversation. So, if some of the biggest organizations in the world have been hacked into, then, what kind of hope do the little guys out there, we have? Most of us aren't going to have the money to be able to pay like a huge ransom, I'm sure. But
well, that's the thing. So absolutely, you're 100% correct, right? And a lot of times the ransomware, I don't know, what do I call them? The bad guys, right? They kind of judge based on the company size and things like that. They're going to give you an appropriate price, right? Because it's in their best interest to give you a price that you're willing to pay, right? They're not going to send you a note saying, hey, I need you to pay $100,000, if it's your home computer or you have a small business, because you just don't have that type of money, right? So it's a game, really. I've heard of stories, where they initially say, okay, we want you to pay, $5,000, right? And then the business owner or whatever starts, back and forth using some chats and things like that. Say, hey, I can't afford that. I'm a small business, blah, blah, blah. And they end up coming, lowering the price low enough that he says, okay, fine. I'll give you $800 or whatever it is. And then just please free up my computer,
Yeah. So what can a small business owner do if they kind of get in that situation, or what do people do? Do they just call you up, Tom, help me? What would someone do?
Well, in terms of, what should you do if you get hacked? It really comes down to the basics, right? So there's this rule called a 3-2-1 rule. And it's referring to backups, right? So basically what it means is you want 3 copies of your data, and you want to make sure that you save your data on at least 2 different types of media. So whether it's one copy on a local hard drive, another copy on an external hard drive, or like a NAS that you might have connected to a network, and then so that's the 2, and then the 1 basically means that make sure you have at least 1 copy of your data up in the cloud somewhere, right? So that you're always covered. And it really comes down to the basics, not just about backups, right? And I can give you a really good example. A friend of mine runs an IT company, and he was telling me several months ago that he was helping a small business client that basically got hit with ransomware, right? And I don't know exactly how much they ended up paying, but they ended up paying a certain amount of money to get their data back. And the reason why he had to pay is because he had absolutely no backups, right? Now, he did have a disaster recovery site, which was in the Toronto area. But the problem was that as soon as the bad guys started encrypting his local servers, his local PCs, all those encrypted changes got synchronized in real time to his disaster recovery site in Toronto, right? And that was his backup, basically, right? But synchronization of data between two locations is not backup, right? Because you're just synchronizing the same copy. So in his case, he had absolutely nothing. So he had to pay. He was down for several weeks, before all the data got decrypted. So it was just a really, really bad, for this guy. And he was a small business, so can you imagine trying to run a small business and then all of a sudden all your systems are down? So your servers, not just your desktops, laptops, all of your data, all right, your customer management data. So, I mean, literally, you have nothing. You can't call your customers because all your stuff is in the customer management database. You've got, you can't even generate bills, or invoices and things like that because, again, all your systems are down, right? So it can be a huge challenge. So in terms of the basics, so it's not just about backups, but making sure that you cover off your basic security. So, making sure that your passwords, and I know that everyone is like super, they've heard this 1,000 times. Make sure you use a unique password. Make sure you create, a strong password and things like this, right? But there's this list of the top 25 worst passwords that basically has been published, I think, if I remember correctly, for the last 7 or 8 years. And the password of password123 or the password of password has been on that top 25 list, for the last 7 or 8 years, as long as I can recall that list being a thing, right? So it seems that somewhere along the way, that message of not using those weak and crappy passwords, it's just not sinking into our heads, right? And then the other thing is that, juggling all these passwords, it's a problem. It's a huge problem, and not just for like me or you or a small business owner. I mean, even large corporations, that have really huge budgets and they can spend a ton of money on stuff, right? They don't provide proper tools to their employees so that they can juggle these passwords and manage them properly. So in cases like that, what typically ends up happening is people will, and even employees, staff, they'll come up with their own unique little ways to try to manage all these passwords, right? So over the years, when I've been doing all these penetration tests, I kept basically seeing the same thing. It didn't really matter if you're a hospital, if you're in manufacturing, if you're local government, the police service, whatever, right? Same issues across the board. So typically what I ended up seeing were things like an Excel spreadsheet, where in that Excel spreadsheet, people will store all of their passwords. And what I found really interesting in many cases, is that the passwords were not only business related, but they were also personal related, right? So, I mean, I've come across passwords and logins for Netflix, for Google accounts like Gmail and so on, for Apple accounts, all these things, and pretty much any other website that people would typically use, whether it's like, the Wall Street Journal or anything you can think of, right? And then that information is stored unprotected in these Excel spreadsheets right on the network. And then attackers typically go for these things, right? I can't tell you, I can tell you, and I'm going to tell you, how often I use that information to elevate my level of access in this network because someone stored that password in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet that I ended up having access to, right? In fact, I have a really cool example. A number of years ago, I was testing a utility in the US, and I happened to get credentials for a person that just happened to work in the accounting department. And this person, I ended up checking her profile, that her network file share, and she had an Excel spreadsheet saved in that network file share. And I opened it up, and there were login credentials to the Bank of America corporate account for this particular utility. So I thought, awesome, great, right? So I ended up using those credentials, logging into Bank of America. Now, Bank of America, basically, when I tried to log in using those creds, came back and kind of said, we've never seen this device before, so I think you should answer some security questions, right? So what is your favorite color, or, what's your favorite food, right? And take a guess where I found the answers to those security questions.
In the Excel.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely, right? So, if I was a bad guy, there's an example where it was very easy for me to get access to the corporate bank account. And then at that point, wire, $500,000 to account in Switzerland. Done. Nice payday, but, I'm the good guy. So,
yeah,
exactly. And that is just one example. I mean, I can rhyme off, numerous different examples.
Oh.
So that's what I mean about the basics, right? Making sure you've got the backups, making sure you've got proper passwords, right? And one thing that I want to stress is that attackers, once you do this long enough, the whole penetration testing, or whether you're a hacker and you hack enough systems or you see enough networks, right? You tend to see a lot of patterns over and over and over again. So a good example would be, how do people typically come up with creating these passwords? So your child's name plus the year of birth is usually very, very, popular. So something like, Michael 1988 or something like that, right? Sometimes people would just increment the ending of the password. So they'll start with a particular password, like let's say, password 1, and then they'll go password 2, password 3, password 4. And then I've seen things like password 99, but obviously I'd have no clue if they've gone through 99 versions of that password. But, you get to see these patterns. And then if you're doing things like password guessing on a network, because you're trying to get access to a server or something, you create your own little dictionaries, and then you can use these automated tools to very, very quickly do the password guessing. And it just takes, it makes things super, super easy, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what about, Tom, when, most of us, if not a lot of quite a few of my clients actually will just say, I don't remember my password. It's saved in the computer, right? So there's the, now what is it? Like whether it's on your cell phone or whether it's in your,
in the browser?
Yeah, in the browser, I suppose is probably the right place. Or I know I have a Mac, so it's the,
keychain.
The keychain. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
So is that an okay place for people to store their passwords?
Well, so that question has many different answers. Okay. Why don't we start with the browsers? Yeah. First of all, the way browsers save the passwords for your websites is very insecure. So my suggestion to anyone listening out there or viewing this later time is never, ever, ever save your password into your browser. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. First of all, well, I already said, it's very insecure the way they save. So whether it's Chrome, whether it's Firefox, whether it's Microsoft Edge, whether it's Internet Explorer, if you're still using that browser, they all do a really crappy job in saving that password and making sure that it's securely saved, right? In fact, there are tools out there that attackers can use. So once they get access to your system, all they really have to do is, a couple of clicks or a couple of presses on the keyboard, and their tool will basically extract any of those passwords that you've saved in the browser from the browser. And they can do all of them. So if you have Chrome installed, if you have Firefox installed, it'll basically just boom, 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 go through all the browsers and pull that information out. Now, to their credit, Google has made some changes, and they've basically made some announcements that are going to improve the way that they save, passwords into the browser. But again, I'm not, I haven't done too much reading on that, so I can't really comment too much. But from my experience, that is not the way to go. So instead, what my suggestion would be is to use a password manager. And a password manager is basically just a third-party piece of software, that you would install on your phone, on your iPad, your Android phone, even your Mac, like Mac OS and whatnot, right? And it's just like any other application, but basically it plugs into your browser. So, like personally myself, I've been using a password manager for at least 7, 8 years, maybe even 10 years now, right? And there's a bunch of different ones. So the one that I use personally is called 1Password. The reason why I like using 1Password is because one, it's from a Canadian company, and I always like to support Canadian companies when I can, right? Secondly, they've won a lot of really cool awards, both from Apple and other companies for like, really nice design, really easy to use. And I've read some of their white papers, on how they do the actual encryption, how they store your password, how they protect it. So I basically like what I see, right? So 1Password is one of the options. There's another company that you may have heard of called LastPass. That's more of a cloud-based service. That one I think is from the U.S. if I'm not 100, but I'm not 100% sure. I've used that maybe 12 years ago. It's good. It's one of the better ones, I would say, right? But the thing that I would note with things like LastPass is because it's cloud-based and LastPass has been hacked in the past a number of times, I would enforce two-factor authentication. In fact, that is my all-time suggestion to anybody. Anytime a website of or any service that you use, whether it's Apple, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, what have you, right? If two-factor authentication is available, I should say, my suggestion is to always enable it, right? And then you can use your phone with something like Google Authenticator to generate that second authentication thing, or maybe you can have a text message sent to your phone. Although that these days it's a little bit frowned upon because you can spoof mobile numbers and things like that. So sometimes hackers, if they have control over your mobile phone, they can intercept those text messages, right? So using something like Google Authenticator or Microsoft's Authenticator is a much better option for the two-factor type stuff, right? And there's a third password manager called KeePass. Now, KeePass is a free one. It's not as slick in the way it works, but it still plugs into your browser. So basically, the way these password managers work is as soon as you go to a particular website, and if you happen to have a credential, like a username and password stored in the browser for that, or stored in the KeePass or 1Password, the password manager for that website, it'll basically just ask you for like a master password. And that's how you protect these applications, right? You have like this master password on your phone. You would basically use your thumb, right, or like face recognition or whatever, right? And then it grabs those credentials and it pre-populates the username field and it pre-populates the password field in the browser for you. And then all you do is you click sign in, right? And that information is transferred securely between the little plugin and the actual website. And then the cool thing about these things is that password, because sometimes your operating system will store the password in memory when it's being grabbed from the application and input into the browser, it'll basically disappear from memory within like 60 seconds and so on. So basically, these password managers will clear the password out from memory so that if your computer gets hacked or attacked or whatever, it's not possible for the attacker to grab that information from memory, which is one of the techniques that I use sometimes to get credentials and things like that. So password managers are fantastic. Do you use a password manager? Leslie, do you use a password manager at all?
I,
Are we having an audio issue?
my computer completely went like
Oh,
last
okay.
little bit. If connectivity issue, I think.
Oh, okay.
Last question. So that's another thing. That's a whole other. I'm sure I'll take other. So in fact, like the issue with connectivity. So I was just sort of sitting there going like. Meanwhile, inside I'm dying, right? It's not my computer. The thing, and it's the irony that I should be talking to you when all this goes down. It seems to invariably happen. So your question was, do I use a password? Is that
Manager.
what did you have a question?
Yeah, password manager. Yeah.
Right. I haven't, and I was going to ask you. So some of them do have fees, right? And I think that
Yes.
some people might be reluctant if there are fees associated with it, but I suppose it's better for people to invest in that as opposed to having their information hacked, right? So I haven't done it yet. I'm looking into it, Todd, because not only for me, like remembering my passwords, which I'm pretty good at remembering them. Admittedly, I'm probably one of those people that relies a little too much on having it memorized in like my browser or wherever it is. But also like, my mom's always like, what's my password? Like, she's like, write it down. So, it's funny. I think we're all definitely guilty of it. And I think that those kinds of, those tools would be really, really helpful to keep those passwords sort of at our fingertips for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. LastPass, I think, has a yearly subscription. I don't know exactly how much it costs. 1Password is a monthly subscription as well. Although they used to offer like a one-time purchase type thing, and that's what I use. I don't use their cloud service for 1Password. I actually paid a little bit extra and have their application running on all of my devices. And the nice thing with 1Password is, like I said, I can use it on all my devices. And it does a really good job. I've been very happy with it. Like personally myself, I think I have close to 900 entries in my 1Password database with basically a unique password for every single thing, right? And the nice thing about using password managers is none of my passwords are the same. Every single password is completely different, and every password is uniquely generated, right? So that I don't have to worry. If website A gets hacked and I get an email notification from them saying, hey, you have to go in and you have to change your password, right? I don't have to worry about that password now being out in the open, or some hacking group now has my password, because it's just a random string of letters, numbers, whatever. Right. And I make that string super long. So sometimes it's like 13 characters, sometimes it's 16, sometimes it's longer. And you know what? I really don't care how long it is, right? Because like I said, it's this automated tool that's doing this for me. So I don't know any of the passwords for any of the services. All I know is my master password, which is like super, super long. And that is what I use to get into my 1Password database. And then, of course, with the thumb or the face recognition on the phone, you've got that additional layer of security and so on, right? So for me, it works, right? But I guess you just have to kind of decide, is this something that you want to invest in? And I always, suggest it to everybody, because I definitely do think it's a good thing, because everyone reuses passwords. I talk to a lot of people, and they may have like, say, 5 or 6 or 7 different types of passwords in different degrees of complexity, right? So for their banking password, they're going to use the most complex. For something that they don't really care about, they'll have this password that's fairly weak and they'll just go ahead and use it. Or in other cases, they might have a little notebook, like my parents, for example. My dad, right next to his computer, he's got this little notebook, and all of his passwords, are written down on pieces of paper, and they're very, very simple passwords, super easy to guess and things like that. So I highly, Garen, I would suggest using a password manager.
Once again, my internet is acting goofy. So I got most of the conversation now. It just keeps coming on and off. So, which is just, it's so frustrating. So that was another question I was going to ask you about, was connectivity. How can we make sure we speed up connectivity? Which is, I didn't want to bounce over to that question so quickly because there's other questions I have. Actually, maybe
Yeah.
I'll go back to actually asking you about sort of like Canadian companies hosting their website. So I told you that a friend of mine had said to me, it's so important that Canadians host their websites in Canada for the privacy laws. So do you agree with the same thing? And should U.S. companies maybe host their websites in Canada for those same privacy laws as well, or maybe around the world?
Well, that you know what that really depends on the classification of your data, right? So, I mean, if you have data that is classified as private, whether it's health related or otherwise, right? It's always a good idea to make sure that the data, if you're storing it anywhere in the cloud, that it's within our borders, right? So companies like Microsoft Azure, Amazon's AWS, and then Apple or Google or whatever, they may not always guarantee that your data will stay within our borders, right? Because they also have to make sure that your data gets bounced around to multiple locations globally. So just in case their data center here in Toronto, goes up in smoke, that your data was replicated to some other location, right? I think, don't quote me on this, but I think Amazon AWS or Amazon in general, I think is the only company that will guarantee that your data stays within Canada when you sign up for the service. But again, don't quote me on that. This is something that I've heard from a few other people. So I don't know if they're 100% accurate or not. But yeah, Canada has the PIPEDA, right, which is the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, mouthful. But basically, the way I would approach privacy and security, if you're working for a company or if you're developing a product or if you're developing a service, is make sure that privacy and security is baked into your offerings from the very beginning, right? Because I've seen this many, many times where, let's say, and I've seen this when I worked for specific companies, where basically, they have a project on the go. And let's say that project is given 6 months, right? But of course, like any project, timelines start shifting, right? So initially, when they scoped the project, they said, okay, a security review will have 30 days, right? But because everything gets shifted, what typically ends up happening is the security review, rather than having 30 days, ends up having maybe 5 days, or 6 days or whatever on the tail end, of this project. And then there's this huge pressure on the security team to make sure you get this done really quickly. Come on. We're waiting. We want to get this thing into production or, whatever it happens to be. So that can really create a lot of issues because it can compromise whether it's a service, whether it's an application or what have you, right? So if you bake in privacy and security at every step of your process when you're creating these things, then privacy is no longer an issue because you have these conversations throughout the project with every single stakeholder, and it just makes more sense that way, right? Your other question, whether U.S. companies should bring their data to Canada if they want, more privacy and things like that. I'm not sure if that would help because I think, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know for sure, but I think if a U.S. entity is physically located in the U.S., and if they're sued, their data is subject to the Patriot Act. Their data is subject to any U.S. privacy laws and so on, regardless of where that data resides, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in some other country in the world, right? But again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know for sure. But going back to the first question, I've heard that question from many, many clients in Canada. They are very concerned, with private, especially things like healthcare and health-related information, right? They don't want that information stored by whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft or whatever in some U.S. Data center because, it is subject at that point to the Patriot Act in the States or any of their laws. And then, of course, their famous criminal justice system, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if you can see, I'm still having to keep coming in and out. So glad that you're not having problems.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to pivot into that discussion since I'm having these issues. Do I need a new router, Tom? What is happening? Because I pay for good internet speed, but it's not happening.
You know what? I've had this question before from not just my kids, but from my parents and so on. It's there's many different factors that can play into how well your internet connection is working, right? First of all, is what type of an internet connection are you given by your ISP? Is it going over cable? Is it going over your telephone wire, right? Because these two things work completely differently and they have different capacity and bandwidth, right? So obviously, like, Rogers cable can give you quite a bit more bandwidth versus something like DSL, which is typically what Bell would offer, right? So what kind of a connection are you using? Are you using cable?
I believe so. Here's the thing, like this is where all you're like the puppet master behind the scenes. I'm like, I don't know. We registered with Tech Savvy, which I believe is a redistributor of Rogers, I think. So
yes.
Yeah, well, so I'm paying for good
internet, but okay. And what's your if you don't mind me asking, what's your speed? What speed are you supposed to have?
I think it's up in the 70s.
70s. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we paid for a pretty good significant amount. It's I have a gamer in the house, so and we're all streaming. We don't have live television, so we're all streaming here, and with the gamer in the house, of course, anybody else who has a teenage kid, you just hear this like, "Come on!" I'm like, "The internet isn't working." Like you have to pay for it. So to keep them happy, I tried to pay for one of the upper. I mean, we're not running a business. I mean, other than me, we're not sort of running a big business here, so I didn't figure I had to pay for anything more than that. But I don't know, maybe I do. But I'm not doing that. When I look at the speed, before we clicked online today, I looked on the speed and I was getting like 20, 30, and I was like, yeah, I'm paying for 70. Why am I only getting 20 or 30?
Well, that may also depend on your neighborhood, right? So are you in an older neighborhood? Are you in a newer neighborhood?
Yeah, I think it's a 30-year-old neighborhood. We're surrounded. Does it matter if we're surrounded by trees and things like that? By the weather, if the weather is terrible, does that?
Well, it depends. Sometimes if it rains too much and the cabling gets flooded, Bell is very susceptible to this. But then I've heard from I have some friends that use Rogers, and whenever there's heavy rain and things get flooded, then their internet connection suffers through Rogers as well, right? So environment can have an impact, but basically being in an older neighborhood can have the most significant impact. So for example, Bell's DSL service, right? It goes over the telephone wire. And the way DSL works is in every single neighborhood, Bell would have kind of like this, they call it a D-SLAM. And basically it's just a bunch of equipment that they have in every single neighborhood. And the distance from that D-SLAM to your house will dictate how fast, what kind of a speed you get. The further away you are from that Bell location in your neighborhood, right, the slower the DSL connection gets. Plus there's overhead and things like that. If the wiring in your house is old, that can definitely impact your internet speed, right? So even though you might say, okay, I'm paying for 50 or I'm paying for 60, you might not get that much because of the wiring, because of environmental factors, just because of the location of your house from the DSL D-SLAM. And the other thing that can have impact on your internet connection, I'm assuming you're wireless probably. Are you staying in the basement?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay. So that could also be, and I see a brick wall behind you, right? So that can also have an impact where the wireless signal can't penetrate far enough, right? And if you're in the basement, so wireless signal is a funny thing. And how old is your router?
I have no idea. Well, we changed over to Tech Savvy at least a couple of years ago, and I think that's the modem. See, I don't even know these things. So the router itself, I think, is a couple of years old. I mean, I think at the time I bought a $200 or $300 version, but now I'm thinking, do I need a gaming modem? Will that help?
Well, it may help. So there's two things that you could do. You could look at getting a gaming router, right? Typically, it has more antennas on it, and it does things a little bit differently in terms of so half of the antennas will send the signal, the other half of the antennas will receive the signal, right? Whereas the traditional routers may only have two antennas,
I
right?
think ours has at least 4.
At least four? Okay. Yeah, so typically the way it works is they kind of split that up. And then, of course, it also there's two different frequencies that are used for routers, 2.4 gigahertz, and then there's a 5 gigahertz, right?
Right.
5 gigahertz can send more traffic faster, right? But over a shorter length of distance, right?
Okay.
Whereas the 2.4 gigahertz isn't as fast, but it's got a much longer in terms of length, right? How far it can send the signal. So the location of the router in your home, if it's upstairs on the third floor and you're in the basement, you might find that you get a really weak signal, right? Bricks and things like that. If there's any steel, maybe you're in an office tower or something like that, and there's I don't know, steel that can absorb some of the signal or bounce it off, and it can create some issues. So what we're seeing now in the market is this thing called a mesh network, right? Where basically you've got 3 or 4 devices which are working together as one. So there's the main device that you would connect your router to, and then there might be 3 or 4 different satellite devices that you would place, maybe one upstairs, one on the main floor, one in the basement, one somewhere close to the backyard. And this mesh idea, it creates one singular network, right? So basically it eliminates the weak spots for wireless signal in your house. So maybe that's something that you might consider looking into, is these new interesting, mesh type of configurations. I know Google has one that you can buy off their Google Store. But if you go to any computer store, even like Best Buy or something like that, they can definitely set you up with something like that for sure.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I'm definitely looking into that, because this is driving me crazy. And I'm a small business owner, so and I teach, right? So if I'm teaching online and the connectivity drops, and this is my livelihood, so I can't just sort of have it happen constantly. So it's not just the gamer in the house. Mama needs it too. Mama needs it.
I remember 6 months ago, I was teaching a class. So I was teaching a hacking course. And again, I was sitting here, home office, streaming, and my internet went down. And I use Execulink. And it's been flawless, but every once in a while, and of course, Execulink reuses Rogers cable service, right? But all of a sudden, my internet went down, and I'm teaching live, which is typically what I do, not pre-recorded or anything like that, and I'm scrambling. It's I'm going, shit, what am I going to do now? Is it do I have to restart my router? Is it my modem? Is it me? And I'm going through all these troubleshooting things, but the internet came back. And then 10 minutes later, it dropped again, and it basically did that the entire afternoon. So I ended up finishing off that day, tethering off my phone. And so I ended up using, a ton of gigabytes, right, on my phone. But luckily enough, I wasn't paying for it. My employer was paying for the phone, so I didn't really care. But you know what? That's what I had. You do what you have to do to get the job done, right? So after that, I ended up getting a second internet connection, just in case my primary connection went down. So I've got a DSL connection, which is fairly cheap and inexpensive through Bell. So I've got Rogers over cable, and then I've got a backup connection through Bell. So if either one dies, I always am covered and I've got something going, right? But obviously not everyone can do that, because it tends to get pretty expensive.
I wouldn't even know you could do that. But I didn't even know you could. That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So,
but with what you do, you got to be, not just with the teaching aspect of things, but I'm sure being connected is essential.
Yeah, well, absolutely. As you know, with kids, right? As soon as the internet goes down, even for a second, it's they're all running. It's the internet's not working, or, the Wi-Fi's not working. I can't stream Netflix. I can't do this. I can't play my games, right? And I'm going, oh, come on, give me a break. You know, it was just a momentary flicker. You know, it's like I remember a day where there was no internet, or I remember a day where I had to like literally use my phone and dial into the internet. You know, but they just don't get it.
No, and I
So
don't think they'd be scrambling the same way if it was school. Like, Dad, this school. It's only when their like entertainment stuff goes down.
yeah,
For sure.
exactly.
That's when you know. Anytime I've had to reset anything, I just hear like the thump, thump, thump down the stairs. Somebody's not happy. Oh, I don't know my
Yeah.
key. So, yeah. So, Tom, are there any kind of misconceptions that about what you do that people sort of think that like they probably expect you to have a superhero cape on and just like think you're going to fix everything? But what do you think?
Well, you know, when I talk to people and I tell them that, hey, I've been doing penetration testing and this and that, they go, oh, you're a hacker. Cool. How is that? You know, how does that work? And they have all these questions they start asking and things like that. I guess one of the biggest things is that they think that I'm like a super genius when it comes to, you know, coding programs and breaking operating systems and things like that.
Just
In
setting up
fact,
websites and doing social media and right,
yeah. You know, I
yeah,
mean, while I understand a lot of these things,
right.
I wouldn't consider myself a super expert in all of these things, right? Having said that, the other thing that people think is that hacking is very complex, right? And that's just not the case. I mean, yes, there are certain specific hacks and certain attacks that can be very complex in nature that, you know, basically need the universe to align a certain way for something to work. But a lot of times it's the easy stuff, right? So when I do penetration testing for companies and I try to break into their networks, it's typically the easy passwords that get me the access that I need, at least the initial access that I need onto the network, right? Where I can password guess someone's password, then I impersonate that person, and then, you know, the thing just kind of continues from there. The other part of that is missing patches. So you know how Windows, every once in a while, you know, it just kind of complains and says, "Oh, there is a new, you know, Windows patch that you need to install." Um, and then some people go, "No, I'm not going to bother installing the patch, or I don't have time, or I really don't care," right? So those missing patches can make a huge difference. And sometimes there are specific tools that attackers and penetration testers have access to that can literally exploit these missing patches. So, you know, like I said, hacking can be very easy. Penetration testing be very easy. And then the other thing is that people think is that that's all I do. I do the actual hacking all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just not the case because, you know, if I do a project for a company, and let's say the engagement is like 4 or 5 days in length, the hacking part is only about 25%. The other 75% is sitting in front of my computer writing a report, right? No one likes writing reports. I certainly don't. I don't enjoy writing reports, but it's one of those necessary evils because that's the value add at the end of the day, right? I have to write the report, and that report I specify, here's what I found, here's how you fix it, you know, and that is what the client uses to improve their thing. So if you want to be a hacker, if you want to be, you know, get into penetration testing or security, you really have to like writing reports because 75% of the time, that's exactly what you're doing is just writing those reports.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common with a lot of jobs. I grew up with a lot of police. A lot of their job is spent writing reports too. You think they're out
Yeah,
there
they
sort of
do,
like
right?
getting the bad
Yeah.
guys. Yeah. It's a lot of report writing, and so that definitely goes on behind the scenes for sure. So I guess I only have like I mean we've got about 7 more minutes, but you know, so to your point about those patches and things like that, I think that you know people who have PCs. I'm a Mac girl, so I feel a little bit more secure with our computers. But I think a lot of people would have the assumption that like that is it pronounced McAfee, that those kind
Yes.
of that kind of software just makes them, you know, bulletproof. But I've heard that McAfee is like one of like because it's so popular, it's easy to hack into those from a PC standpoint.
Well, you know, just like anything else, there are antivirus products and there are antivirus products, right? There's the good ones, there's the bad ones, and there's the mediocre ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing that I want to stress is just because you have antivirus on your computer does not make you 100% safe,
Right.
Okay. Antivirus as protection is a reactive technology. It's always behind the curve. So a good example, this past weekend, on Friday, there was a huge attack that I mentioned already, Kaseya, right? Antivirus was of no help in those cases, right? And that's because the hack software that they ended up using, the little agent that they ended up pushing, to all those 1,000 or 1,500 organizations, antivirus programs have never seen that before. It's brand spanking new, right? So a lot of times, products will look at not only a signature of something that you're trying to run or execute, but they'll also look at behavior. So in other words, if you run a program on a PC, what is it that it's doing? Is it writing to the hard drive? Is it accessing memory? Is it accessing something, within the operating system, right? And then based on the behavior of that application or whatever you're running, it'll make a determination. Well, this is good. This is bad. I should block it. I should allow it, right? And some of them do a better job. Some of them do a really bad job. So McAfee, like you mentioned, unfortunately, from my experience, it's not a good one. Okay. What are the why? I don't know why, but from my experience, some of the hacking tools that I've used over the years basically were executed no problem, and we're able to do all sorts of things, on the network. And I'm not trying to single out McAfee specifically.
Right.
There's other.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's other ones. There's, Bitdefender. There's, oh boy, Symantec, right? There's the one from Russia, Kaspersky, and there's a whack of other ones, right? The one that I personally use is called ESET. It's a company from Europe, and the primary reason why I use ESET is because every time I had a pen test for a client and they were using ESET, it gave me a lot of trouble, right? But basically, anything I was trying to push to their desktops, to their servers, whatever, I was always having to fight against ESET because it was always blocking things. That's not to say that, ESET is the only one that's good. Symantec is better. The Russian one called Kaspersky, that one is one of the better ones as well. But then there's a lot of issues because it's Russian. The US government doesn't allow it. The Canadian government doesn't allow it and all these things. But you know what? This is my home PC. I want to make sure that it's protected. I want to make sure that my kids are protected. If the Russians have my data, whatever, I don't care because I don't have anything sensitive on my computer, right? I mean, I just use it for browsing. I use it for internet. I use it for playing games and things like that, right? So it doesn't matter. But I know that I'm using better tools to protect my PC. So, AV is just only one of those things. The other stuff is make sure that you always patch, right? I mean, Windows 10 does a pretty good job because it kind of like forces you to patch on a regular basis, right? And then it's going to restart your machine at night or whatever, and then force that patch to be installed. Mac OS, you said you feel safer. From my experience, yes, Mac OS is a little tiny bit safer, but I wouldn't say that it's as safe as Apple says that it is. Okay. Over the last, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, there have been some viruses and things like that were pretty public, that specifically target Mac OS. So if we go back in history, right, the only reason why Windows was always such a huge target for viruses and things like that is because if I'm going to write a virus, I'm going to target the biggest segment, right? I'm not going to waste, 6 months writing this virus and then I'm going to attack, Mac OS because there's only like 1% of the world uses Mac OS. I'm going to focus on Windows because Windows is used by 80 or 90% of the world, right? So, Apple tells you one thing, but the reality is always a little bit different, right? So when I had Macs, I mean, I don't have any Macs right now, but at one point I had some MacBooks, I had this and that. I even have an iMac, kind of sitting here on the floor. I had antivirus software installed on my iMac and my MacBook. At the time, The Russian one, Kaspersky, was the only vendor that actually made antivirus software for the Mac. Now it's a little bit different. I mean, there's other options that you can go out and buy, whether it's Symantec, whether it's some of the other. I think ESET also makes a AV product for the Mac, but I would highly encourage you to have it. And one of the reasons for that is it's not so much the viruses, but it's the hacking tools, right? That you want to make sure that you block. So and I tell this to my clients. So utilities, for example, right? They have these segmented networks called SCADA networks that control the electrical grid, that control, lighting, street lighting, that will control water, wastewater, freshwater, and things like that. And a lot of times they don't have antivirus running on these SCADA networks. And the primary reason for that is because these SCADA networks have no internet access. Okay, because they're completely segmented. So literally you have to walk up to the PC to do anything, right? And in some cases, they may not want to walk up with a little thumb drive to every single PC on the SCADA network to update the signatures for the AV product, right? But then I always told my clients, well, listen, it's not just the AV, it's not just the virus signatures that you want to worry about. It's once an attacker is on there, they can execute hacking tools. Right? And if a hacking tool is available on the internet, then antivirus vendors will have that tool in their database so that if someone tries to execute that hacking tool on your computer, even if you don't update your AV signatures on a regular basis, then that AV will stop it, right? Will stop the hacking tool from executing. So on your Mac, I would highly encourage you to get something.
Okay, I'll definitely look into that. Definitely. Awesome. It looks like we're out of time. So do you have any last sort of parting words for anybody that's watching? Any sort of last thoughts?
I think, you know what? I want you to remember that it only takes one weak password or one missing patch or one person in an organization for the entire network to get hacked. Right? And that's a very powerful statement. And I've seen it time and time and time again, where companies spend a lot of money trying to get things, secure and this and that, but it only takes that one person, that one click, of a website or whatever, right? That can get you compromised. Ransomware is not going away anytime soon because it's a good money-making scheme for these bad guys. So, you have to make sure you got your backups, make sure you've got, all those things that we talked about, right? And the last thing that I want to say is give your IT guy a hug the next time you see them, because the hard work that they do.
I don't know many IT guys, Tom, that are huggers.
Well, you're absolutely right, but yeah, you're right. We're not huggers, but maybe a virtual hug. Maybe a virtual hug, just say, hey, good job, Mr. IT guy. I like the job that you're doing, because a lot of times we just hear it when things go, sideways. But when things are running, we don't hear a thing, right? And then take security, privacy seriously, because it's only going to get worse, right? There's a lot of changes in the industry, in the insurance industry. I predict that it's going to get very expensive for you to get cyber insurance down the road. Because it's a money-losing scheme right now from the information that I have. Basically, what I've read and heard is that for every dollar a Canadian insurance company takes in premiums, they pay out $4 in claims. So, that's not the way they make money, right? So it's going to get expensive. It's going to get really hard for companies to qualify for cyber insurance down the road, right? And if ransomware keeps going and it gets more and more expensive, so make sure you take security and privacy, seriously, because it is important. It shouldn't be an afterthought.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a whole other subject altogether of that people, from the social media standpoint and what data is being gathered from us. It's a whole different subject, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now.
No, absolutely.
It's just interesting to me that people don't really mind, because they're like, well, what have I got to, I don't care. But anyway, that's a whole other subject altogether. Yeah. So anyway, so how can people reach you, Tom, if they're looking to, work with you? How can they reach you?
Well, I have a LinkedIn profile, so they can reach me through LinkedIn, whether through messaging or whatnot. And then also, you have my email address and whatnot, so they can reach out to you directly. And then you can just forward any contact information, their information to me, and I'd be more than happy to help anybody. My focus right now is small business. I'm not looking to work with giant corporations, although, if one comes calling, not a problem. But my focus is small business because I think that's where a lot of the gap currently exists with respect to security is small and micro businesses.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like I've got a lot of catching up to do, Tom. Clearly from the connection standpoint, because it's gone down like how many 5-6 times. I'm sitting here trying to patiently wait it through. So I'm gonna have to rewatch some of the stuff that you told me because I didn't see it the first time. So I appreciate all your insights, and it sounds like I have a lot of work to do in order to get up to speed.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm always happy to talk to anybody. So if you need anything, just reach out and, I'll be there and do what I can.
Awesome. Terrific.
All right.
Well, thank you so much. And,
all right.
Okay. Well, and if anybody has any comments, as I said, share them on the blog or whichever channel that you're watching it on. And of course, as Tom mentioned, you can connect with him on LinkedIn. So again, thanks again, Tom. And I know
You're welcome.
Soon. Okay.
It was fun. I liked it.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. See you next time.
Okay.